This is the artificial intelligence voice of Ben Shapiro narrating this pod slice summary of the Ben Shapiro Show. During the fourth Republican debate, Ben Shapiro compares and contrasts the nuances of the top two candidacies of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, who are vying for a distant second place behind frontrunner Donald Trump. Shapiro points out that in a typical election cycle, DeSantis, with his robust conservative track record in Florida, would be a clear leader. He quotes DeSantis' conservative viewpoints and commitment towards upholding the U.S. Constitution as the cornerstone of the nation's governance. The transcript comprises a detailed discussion on particular social issue differences between DeSantis and Haley. Their views on transgender bathroom use emerges as a major disagreement point. Haley accuses DeSantis of being lenient on the issue, but DeSantis swiftly retorts, arguing that he stood up for protectiveness in Florida while she didn't. Donald Trump's prevailing influence on Republican politics attributed to sustained goodwill from his 2016 presidential triumph and his conservative presidency. Despite losing to Joe Biden in 2020, Trump's appeal remains strong, notably due to the shady electoral affairs in 2020 and Biden's current poor polling numbers. DeSantis' critique of Trump, especially concerning his age, failed to resonate during the debate. There's no anger among Republicans towards Trump, and any unfavorable perception of Trump's behavior is superseded by the Republicans' disapproval of Biden's mishandling of governance. In contrast, Chris Christie's attempts to declare Trump as unfit for presidency fall flat. Christie tries to pinpoint DeSantis' unease in answering whether Trump's fit for presidency, but DeSantis tactfully avoids getting embroiled in the conversation. Christie floats as the only one willing to question Trump explicitly. However, his own credibility as an alternative to Trump is questionable due to his policy decisions and his previous association with Trump. In the end, the divisive issue of sexual mutilation surgery enters the debate, serving as another distinguishing factor between the candidates. In a deeper dive into the Republican debate, Ben Shapiro continues to assess each contender, focusing on less traditional hopefuls. Cast into the spotlight is WA perceived as the game changer in the debate. This unique approach involves intertwining widely accepted Republican beliefs with more unusual or controversial claims, thus fashioning a sandwich of ideas to stir interest. The points that V claims to be truths only, he will vocalize range from the dubious participation of inside forces in the January 6th Capitol attack to asserting that the 2020 elections were rigged by big tech. This approach sees the perennial establishment attack by those seen as outsiders, much like Trump did in 2016, accusing the so-called interventionists in the Republican Party of faulty policies. Interestingly, Shapiro points out that V touches on topics that Tucker Carlson, the renowned Fox News host, has addressed more effectively for a longer period. While VA's audacious theories may raise eyebrows, they may not add substance to his candidacy. Next, Shapiro delves into V's strategy to attack Nikki Haley, positioned as the mainstream candidate. As V sees her as an ideal A candidate of differentiation, he contrasts against her standing to attract anti-establishment supporters. His drive to differentiate his campaign from Haley's mirrors Trump's tactics against Republican rivals in 2016. However, Shapiro also explains this exposes a critical division within the Republican Party between hawks, those favoring intervention, and isolationists inclined to avoid foreign entanglements. This distinction has been a historical party query dating back to World War II, a dispute that remains open as international crises present ever-increasing danger. The issue of foreign policy resonates throughout the debate, and Shapiro criticizes Biden for his reticence to acquit Ukraine against Russian aggression. He stresses that a coherent strategy for Ukraine's crisis and any international crisis, for that matter, is essential. Joe Biden's observed passive approach is regarded as a contributory factor to his poor ratings and perception of weakness. Lastly, Shapiro points to Biden's stance on Israel as contradicting the general Republican perspective. Biden's tacit support for Iran is noted as concerning, contradicting the traditional Republican stance favoring a strong alliance with Israel. In the debate analysis, Ben Shapiro considers how Abe, a somewhat untraditional candidate, makes controversial claims concerning mainstream Republican beliefs, similar to Trump's strategies in 2016. V's technique of using prevalent theories, such as dubious conducts in the January 6th Capitol attack and the 2020 elections' alleged manipulation by big tech, is acknowledged. Despite raising interest, Shapiro notes this may not essentially substantiate his candidacy. Shapiro reviews V's unique strategy, focusing on a targeted critique of traditional candidate Nikki Haley, leading to an analysis of the existing division within the Republican Party. The divide is described as a contest between hawks and isolationists, with each group favoring a distinct approach to foreign affairs. In terms of foreign policy, Shapiro remarks on the need for a coherent Ukraine strategy amid the current global crises. He critiques the perceived indecisiveness of President Joe Biden, attributing this to his declining popularity and his perceived weakness internationally. Shapiro also highlights Biden's controversial stance towards Israel, particularly his apparent support for Iran, conflicting with the traditional Republican perspective endorsing robust Israeli alliances. In discussing V's attacks on Haley, Shapiro expounds on how this mirrors larger Republican divisions between hawks and isolationists. Shapiro argues that Biden's complicity in the Ukraine crisis and his divergent stance on Israel weaken his public standing and display a lack of decisive leadership. His debate tactics include challenging Nikki Haley's foreign policy wisdom, arguing that experience is not tantamount to understanding. He criticizes her support for what he views as a futile war in Ukraine and suggests that neither Haley nor Biden could identify the regions they propose defending. His tactics, however, can come off as juvenile, according to critics like Chris Christie. Shapiro also criticizes V for his provocative attacks on Haley, including branding her as a fascist because of their foreign policy disagreements. Such aggressive tactics, he argues, distract from a substantive policy debate. The overall discussion brings to the limelight the urgency of cohesion within the Republican Party's ideological leanings, especially concerning foreign policy. Shapiro concludes by remarking that V's candidacy, although unlikely to gain traction, nevertheless embodies a problematic schism within the Republican faction. Within the podcast segment, Ben Shapiro emphasizes the difference between winning a primary campaign and a general election for Republicans. He cites Nikki Haley as the best positioned Republican against Joe Biden, marked by polling data. Shapiro touches on Haley's policy views, indicating that she leans moderate across policies such as abortion and gender surgery for minors. Shapiro also brings attention to the rising animosity within the Republican Party. He cites tensions between Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz that ended in McCarthy leaving and a shift in House leadership. This static, Shapiro states, creates difficulties in passing bills and securing the Republican majority in the House for the long term, with its edge currently at 2 votes. Shapiro alleges that Democrats are betting on Donald Trump's unpopularity, building an election strategy on the hope that he loses rather than their own candidate winning. Such a wager, Shapiro infers, indicates Democrats' reliance on Republicans' historical knack for stealing defeat from the jaws of victory. In the example of Joe Biden's claim, "I will defeat Trump," it's clear Democrats are leaning into predecessor success rather than showing fresh outlooks. A focal point of the discussion was the new comedy movie from Daily Wire, Lady Ballers. Shapiro announces its success as the nation's #1 streaming film and provides a detailed rundown of its satirical plot. This comedy sparks debate surrounding gender and identity issues in sports, barbed with sociopolitical commentary. Through the episode, Shapiro demonstrates the competing strategies top Republicans are implementing. This brings to the forefront the intensifying factions within the Republican Party and their struggle to present a united front. The tension shown to have internal consequences that could imperil their hold on the House majority. By broadening the conversation, Ben Shapiro raises the contentious issue of whether Donald Trump's eventual criminal conviction will influence poll numbers, expressing doubts due to the existing expectations of his guilt due to his location. He notes the increasing evidence that Joe Biden, rather than presenting a viable strategy, is exploiting Trump's unpopularity as a means of securing his own success. Shapiro then delves into the Biden administration's ongoing struggles with the Ukraine crisis, specifically their proposed funding to Ukraine being tied to border security by Republicans. The host expresses confusion over why Biden, who could potentially secure his own funding and subsequently claim progress in border security, is battling against such a proposal. Shapiro suggests an ideological commitment to open borders is behind this refusal. The discussion moves on to the situation with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, who seems to be maintaining that the immigration system has been struggling for years to receive proper funding. However, Shapiro suggests that what Mayorkas and Biden actually want is not to close the border or change border policy, but to facilitate the quicker entry of more people. Shapiro then criticizes the Biden administration's decision to veto a bill providing funding for Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine in association with border security. This act continues to expose the unresolved tension between the Republicans and Democrats concerning national security and immigration policies. In the world of academia, Shapiro refers to the controversy around the Harvard Mitt and Penn, presidents refusing to explicitly condemn when chants allegedly calling for genocide against Jews occurred on campus. However, it's pointed out that there's a clear double standard as campuses enforce strict speech rules, which would likely be breached if someone claimed boys are not girls. The latter part of the discussion focuses on the confusing position of university administrations concerning free speech and their measured reactions to anti-Semitic incidents on campus. Shapiro criticizes university presidents for their apparent hypocrisy, advocating free speech when it comes to anti-Semitism while enforcing stringent speech codes otherwise. The host concludes that this indecisiveness is due to their prioritization of intersectionality over tackling the apparent rise of anti-Semitism. Despite the backlash from various quarters compelling university presidents to condemn anti-Semitism more directly, Shapiro maintains they essentially still espouse the same views that led to the controversy. Shapiro further exacerbates the bigwigs of mainstream media and higher education, demonstrated through his critique of a View segment featuring Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg. According to him, both figures display a flawed understanding of the complicated situation regarding freedom of speech on campuses. Hostin attempts to argue that the university presidents are legally barred from taking action against anti-Semitic speech by students, while Goldberg, known for her controversial statement identifying Hitler's actions as white-on-white violence, takes a stance of defense for the universities. The segment further showcases the troubling double standards prevalent in higher education institutions regarding freedom of speech when Hostin suggests college is the perfect place to have these sorts of uncomfortable conversations. However, Shapiro points out the paradox in this sentiment, arguing that such a laissez-faire approach to uncomfortable conversations would not be applied to hateful rhetoric against any other racial or religious group. Moving on to street-level censorship imposed by the majority, Shapiro spotlights that the First Amendment standard doesn't apply on college campuses due to private policies and codes of conduct that directly or indirectly curb free speech rights. He shares his experiences of being banned from campuses for expressing his views, highlighting the discrepancies in the selective manner various speeches are treated. As the discourse continues, Shapiro makes a striking comment about Whoopi Goldberg, calling her a liar and a hypocrite for misrepresenting the freedom of speech situation on campuses. He criticizes her for blindly defending these universities' policies, despite the clear inequality in the way free speech parameters are applied. Finally, Shapiro accentuates the irony of free speech advocates' selective application of their own defense, especially when their positions are threatened. He contends that, though they propose that free speech should have almost no restrictions, these same advocates often place strict limitations when certain views challenge their own. This reflects the dichotomy and the restrictive climate within American universities regarding freedom of speech, particularly when it's used as a shield to foster hate speech, such as calls for the extermination of Jews in the Middle East.